He was 18 years old when he inherited a piece of land with a broken barn on it for the grand sum of $4. What he discovered buried beneath it would not just change his life, it would reveal the truth about the family he thought had abandoned him. If you've ever felt like you were starting over from zero, with nothing but the clothes on your back and a past you'd rather forget, then hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. Because sometimes the end of one road is just the beginning of a path you were always meant to walk. The air in Ms. Albright's office smelled like stale coffee and manila folders. It was the official smell of my life up to that point. Paperwork, assessments, and lukewarm reassurances. I sat on the edge of a vinyl chair that sighed every time I shifted my weight, my hands clasped between my knees to keep them from shaking. Today was my 18th birthday. It wasn't a celebration. It was an eviction notice from the state of California.
"Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm, the same tone she'd used for 2 years. It was a voice designed to handle fragile things without admitting they were broken. "Everything is finalized. You're officially an adult, no longer a ward of the court." She slid a thick brown envelope across the polished surface of her desk. It stopped perfectly in front of me, an island of finality. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. Inside was my birth certificate, my Social Security card, and a cashier's check for $212.41, the balance of my state-managed savings account. It was everything I had in the world. "There's one more thing," Ms. Albright said, pulling another much older envelope from her drawer. This one was yellowed at the edges, the paper soft and thin with age. It felt different. It felt like it had a history, while the other envelope just had a case number. "This was left in your file. It's from your grandfather. It was to be given to you on your 18th birthday, under the condition that you were not in the custody of your mother." My breath caught in my throat. My grandfather. I barely remembered him. He was a ghost from a life before the system, a vague memory of calloused hands and the smell of sawdust. He died when I was 10, a year before my mom's problems got too big for our tiny apartment, and I ended up in my first group home. After she lost custody, I was told she'd left the state. I hadn't heard from her since. Being kicked out of her life at 16 was the event that landed me here, in this office, being formally kicked out of the system. "He left you something," she continued, watching my face carefully. "It's unconventional. He arranged it with a family law attorney years ago, a quitclaim deed to a property he owned. It's a small parcel out in the high desert. Not much there from the looks of it. A barn, I think." I stared at her, confused. "A property?" I was expecting to spend the next few weeks in a shelter. "The deed transfer was prepaid, all but the county filing fees, $4. She slid a small receipt across the desk. "I took care of it for you. It's yours now, officially." $4 for a piece of the earth. It sounded like a joke, a cruel punchline to a life that had already been full of them. I picked up the old envelope. My grandfather's handwriting was a shaky, determined scrawl. Inside was a single heavy brass key and a folded sheet of paper. The note was short. "Leo, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and things didn't go the way I prayed they would. I'm sorry. This key opens a lockbox under the 3rd floorboard to the left of the main barn door. What's inside is the real inheritance. Don't let them take the land. It's more important than it looks. Be strong, son. I love you. Gramps." The words blurred. It was the first time in years anyone had called me son or told me they loved me. A hot, tight knot formed in my chest.
Ms. Albright cleared her throat softly. "The address is on the deed. It's remote, Leo. There's a bus that goes to a town about 5 miles from there. From what I can gather, the property has no running water or electricity. It's been vacant for a long time." She was trying to warn me, to manage my expectations. But she didn't understand. For a boy who had spent the last 2 years in a room he shared with 3 other strangers, a room that was never truly his, the idea of a place, any place, that belonged to me was a staggering concept. A barn, a piece of dirt. It was more than I'd had a minute ago. "Thank you, Ms. Albright," I said, my voice hoarse. I stood up, stuffing both envelopes into the thin backpack that held all my worldly possessions. 2 changes of clothes, a worn paperback, and a toothbrush. "Leo," she said, stopping me at the door. I turned. Her professional calm had cracked, just a little. There was real concern in her eyes. "Be careful. The world can be difficult. But you're a good kid. You've got a good heart. Don't let anyone take that from you." I nodded, unable to speak. I walked out of the county building and into the blinding afternoon sun. The city noise was a roar, sirens, traffic, people yelling. For 18 years, I had been a passenger in my own life, moved from one place to another by forces I couldn't control. Now the driver's seat was empty. I had a bus ticket, a key, and a destination that was nothing more than a dot on a map. I walked to the Greyhound station, the weight of the key in my pocket a constant, heavy reminder. It felt less like a gift and more like a riddle. My grandfather was a simple man, a carpenter. He wasn't the kind of person to have secrets or complicated plans. Whatever was waiting for me in that barn, I knew it wasn't a treasure chest full of gold. His currency had been hard work and honesty. The bus ride was 14 hours long, a journey that took me from the sprawling, indifferent concrete of the coast to the vast, empty expanse of the Mojave. I watched the world change through the grimy window. Green hills gave way to brown plains, dotted with Joshua trees that clawed at the pale blue sky like desperate spirits. The other passengers were ghosts too, each lost in their own story, their faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of their phones. I had no phone to look at. I just watched the desert roll by. I was the only one who got off at the town of Amboy, which wasn't so much a town as a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled around a gas station. The air was thin and hot, and the silence was so complete it rang in my ears. The bus pulled away in a cloud of diesel fumes, leaving me alone on the side of a 2-lane highway that stretched to the horizon in either direction. According to the map Ms. Albright had printed for me, the property was 5 miles north, down a dirt road that started behind the abandoned motel. 5 miles. My backpack felt heavier now, and the $200 in my pocket felt impossibly small. I bought a gallon of water and 2 bags of beef jerky at the gas station, a purchase that felt both practical and deeply depressing. This was my life now, walking into the unknown, fueled by preserved meat. The walk was brutal. The sun beat down, and the dirt road was a ribbon of fine, pale dust that coated my shoes and filled my lungs. There was no sign of life, just the occasional lizard skittering across the path and the lonely cry of a hawk circling high above. My hope, which had been a small, flickering flame in Ms. Albright's office, was starting to dwindle. I felt a familiar panic rising in my chest, the feeling of being utterly, terrifyingly alone. This was a mistake.
A wild goose chase left by a dead man. I should have stayed in the city, gone to the shelter, tried to find a job washing dishes. But then I saw it. At the top of a low rise, silhouetted against the enormous empty sky, was the dark shape of a barn. It was worse than I had imagined. The wood was silver gray and splintered, weathered by decades of sun and wind. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse, and several panels of corrugated tin had been torn away, leaving dark, gaping holes. The land around it was a chaotic mess of tumbleweeds and stubborn, thorny bushes. There was no house, no fence, just this solitary, decaying structure in the middle of nowhere. My heart sank. This wasn't a home, it was a ruin. I pushed my way through the weeds to the front of the barn. The main doors were huge, big enough to drive a tractor through, and they hung crookedly on their rusted hinges. One was slightly ajar. I squeezed through the gap, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom inside. The interior was vast and cathedral-like. Shafts of dusty light cut through the holes in the roof, illuminating a universe of swirling dust motes. The air was thick with the smell of dry rot, ancient hay, and something else. Something earthy and clean, like the smell of soil after a rare desert rain. The floor was packed earth, except for a section of wooden planking near the entrance. My grandfather's words came back to me. Under the third floorboard to the left of the main barn door. I knelt down, my backpack sliding to the ground. The boards were thick and heavy, covered in a fine layer of dust. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. To the left. I ran my fingers along the edge of the third board. There was no handle, no obvious seam. I dug at the dirt packed in the crack with my fingers, then used the house key from my old group home, a key I no longer needed, to pry at the edge. The wood groaned in protest. I put all my weight into it, and with a final splintering crack, the end of the board lifted up. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached into the dark space beneath. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was an old military ammunition box, heavy and olive green. On the front, someone had stenciled the name Vance in faded white paint. And on the side, there was a heavy-duty padlock. I took the brass key from my pocket. My hand was shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to get it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. I lifted the latch, the metal scraping loudly in the cavernous silence of the barn. I took a deep breath and opened the lid. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a weapon. It was paper. The box was filled with stacks of letters, bundled together with twine. And on top of the letters was a large, sealed manila envelope. I lifted it out. It was heavy, much heavier than it should have been. I tore it open. Inside were stacks of cash, $100 bills, wrapped in paper bands. I counted them, my hands trembling. $10,000. To me, it might as well have been $1 million. Beneath the cash was a simple, hand-drawn diagram on a piece of graph paper. It looked like a cross-section of the barn. It showed the main floor, and then, beneath it, another level. A space dug out of the earth, with lines indicating pipes and what looked like a glass roof. At the bottom, my grandfather had written a single word: Walipini. I didn't know what it meant. I set the diagram aside and picked up the first bundle of letters. They were addressed to me. The dates on them started 8 years ago, right after he died. They were written in his familiar, shaky hand. He had been writing to me for years, even from beyond the grave. I sat down on the dusty floor of my $4 barn, leaned my back against the splintered wall, and began to read. My dearest Leo, the first letter began,
If you are reading this, I am so sorry. I am sorry I wasn't there to see you grow into a man. I am sorry for what your mother put you through. I want you to know none of it was your fault. You were a good kid, the best kid a man could ask for a grandson. I had to stop and wipe my eyes. The words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still open. I kept reading, and with every page, a story I never knew began to unfold. It was the story of my grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who came home to a world that didn't want him. He worked as a carpenter, saving every penny he could. He wrote about meeting my grandmother, about the day my mother was born, about his hopes and his regrets. And then he started writing about the land. I bought this piece of nothing in 1998, he wrote. Everyone thought I was crazy. Your grandma, God rest her soul, she called it my dirt farm. But I saw something out here, Leo. Peace. Quiet. A place where a man could think. But it was more than that. I was saving up to build a small house here, for me and your grandma to retire in. Then she got sick. The medical bills, they ate up everything. All we had left was this land, paid for free and clear. He wrote about my birth, how holding me for the first time was the happiest day of his life. He wrote about my mother's struggles, her addiction that started small and grew into a monster that consumed her. He tried to help her, tried to get her into rehab, but it never stuck. I knew she was going to lose you one day, he wrote in a letter dated a year before I went into the system. I could see it in her eyes. The monster was winning, and I knew I didn't have much time left myself. The doctors gave me a year, maybe 2. So I made a plan. A crazy plan. But it was the only thing I could think of to make sure you had a chance. A real one. This was where the story took a turn. He wrote about a friend from the war, a man named Sergeant Miller, who had gotten into some trouble after coming home. Bad trouble. He'd ended up on the wrong side of some very dangerous people. A local crime syndicate that specialized in loan sharking and intimidation. Miller had borrowed money he couldn't repay. They were going to kill him. I couldn't let that happen, my grandfather wrote. He saved my life over there. I owed him. So I went to see these people. I made them a deal. I told them I had this piece of land, worthless to anyone but me. I told them I knew things about construction, about building hidden spaces. I offered to build them something on my land, a storage facility, a place where they could keep things they didn't want anyone else to find. In exchange, they would forgive Miller's debt and leave him alone. My blood ran cold. My grandfather, the honest carpenter, had made a deal with criminals. They laughed at me at first, but I was serious. I spent the last year of my life digging, by hand mostly. I was weak, but I was determined. I dug out a space beneath the barn, a bunker, reinforced concrete walls, a hidden entrance, ventilation. I built it for them. It was the hardest, dirtiest work I've ever done, and it was my greatest sin. He explained that the deal was simple. They could use the bunker for 20 years. After that, the land and everything on it reverted to his estate, to me. They didn't want their name on any deed, so the ownership was never an issue. They just wanted the space. The $10,000 in the box is the payment they gave me. I never spent a dime of it. It's blood money, Leo, and I'm ashamed of it. But I'm more ashamed that it was the only way I could think of to buy you a future. They don't know about you. As far as they're concerned, the land belongs to a dead man. The 20-year agreement is up next month. After that, they are supposed to clear out and never come back. The diagram in the box isn't for the bunker I built for them. That entrance is sealed from the outside now. The diagram is for my real plan. For you. He explained the word walipini. It's a term from South America for an underground greenhouse. A pit greenhouse designed to use the thermal mass of the earth to maintain a stable temperature, allowing you to grow food year-round, even in a harsh climate like the desert. "I want you to build it, Leo," he wrote, his handwriting growing more frantic, more desperate. "Take their dirty money and use it to build something that creates life. Grow things, food, flowers, whatever you want. Turn this place of secrets and shame into a place of hope. That's your real inheritance. Not the land, not the money. The chance to build something good out of something bad. That's the only way I can think of to redeem myself, to make this right." The last letter was short, dated just a few days before he died. "I'm tired now. The work is done. The deal is made. I hope you can forgive me for the choice I made. I hope you choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. That's something I failed to do. Don't be like me. Be better. I love you, Leo. Your Gramps." I sat there in the dusty silence for a long time, the letters spread around me. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows through the barn. My whole body ached with a grief so profound it felt like I was being crushed. I cried. I cried for the grandfather I barely knew, a man who had made a deal with the devil to save his grandson. I cried for the mother I had lost, and I cried for the lonely, scared boy I had been for so long. Everything was different now. This wasn't just a dilapidated barn on a worthless piece of land. It was a legacy, a burden, a secret, and a choice. I could take the $10,000 and run, disappear, start a new life somewhere else and never look back. No one would ever know. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Who knew if these criminals would honor their deal with a dead man? What if they came back? Or I could stay. I could honor his last wish. I could take his blood money and wash it clean with my own sweat and hard work. I could build something that grew, something that lived. I could turn this place of secrets into a sanctuary. I want to pause here for a second. If this story is hitting you, if you've ever been faced with a choice that felt bigger than you, a choice where the easy way out was tempting, but you knew, deep down, it wasn't the right way, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt the weight of a family secret, or a promise you weren't sure you could keep? This channel is a community for people who understand that life isn't always simple, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is choose the hard path. You're not alone in that feeling. I spent my first night in the barn, wrapped in a thin blanket I'd bought at the gas station. Sleep didn't come. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle of the wind outside sounded like a threat. I kept thinking about the bunker beneath my feet, a dark, secret space built out of desperation and shame. I thought about the men who had used it. What had they stored down there? I didn't want to know. I just wanted them to be gone. The next morning, I made my decision. I folded my grandfather's letters carefully and put them back in the box, along with the money. I sealed the box and placed it back under the floorboard. I wasn't running. I was staying. I was going to build his greenhouse. I had no idea how. I was a city kid. I'd never built anything more complicated than a model airplane. The only thing I knew about gardening was that plants needed water and sun. But my grandfather had left me a diagram, and more importantly, he had left me a reason. I walked the 5 miles back to town. In the gas station, I bought a notepad and a pen. I spent the rest of the day in the tiny, one-room public library, a place that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The librarian was a kind woman with silver hair and glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity.
Not many 18-year-olds with dusty clothes and a haunted look in their eyes came to the Amboy Library. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked. "I'm looking for books on construction," I said. "And something called a walipini?" She blinked. "A what?" "An underground greenhouse," I explained. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, a pit greenhouse, of course. We have a few old books on sustainable agriculture and off-grid living. From the 70s mostly, but the principles are the same." She led me to a dusty shelf in the back. The books she pulled out were old and faded, but they were treasure maps to me. They had diagrams, charts, and step-by-step instructions. I learned about excavation, about drainage, about framing, about the importance of angling the glazed roof to catch the low winter sun. I spent hours taking notes, my hand cramping, my mind racing. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving, I was planning, I was building. The next day, I started the work. The first task was clearing the land. I bought a machete, a shovel, and thick leather gloves from the town's only hardware store. The man behind the counter, a grizzled old-timer named Mr. Henderson, with a faded baseball cap and suspicious eyes, looked me up and down. "You the one who bought the old Vance place?" he grunted. "Yes, sir." "What are you planning on doing out there? That barn's liable to fall over in the next big wind." "I'm fixing it up," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He snorted. "Good luck with that, kid." The work was backbreaking. I spent a week just clearing the thorny bushes and tumbleweeds from around the barn. My hands, soft from years of institutional life, were quickly covered in blisters that broke and bled and eventually hardened into calluses. My back ached constantly. Every night, I would collapse onto my sleeping bag on the barn floor, too tired to even eat, and fall into a dreamless, exhausted sleep. But with every bush I cleared, with every bit of junk I hauled away, the place felt a little more like mine. I was claiming it, inch by painful inch. Once the area was clear, I started digging. My grandfather's diagram showed the greenhouse should be built on the south side of the barn, to use the barn itself as a windbreak and a heat sink. I marked out a 20 by 40-foot rectangle with stakes and twine. And then, with nothing but a shovel and a wheelbarrow, I began to dig. The desert soil was hard, a mixture of sand and clay, studded with rocks. The first few inches were tough. The first foot was agony. By the end of the first day of digging, I had a pathetic-looking shallow scrape in the ground, and my entire body felt like it was on fire. I sat on the edge of my meager hole, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, and felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was impossible. It would take me years. I thought about the $10,000 hidden under the floor. I could quit right now. I could buy a car, drive to a new city, get an apartment, find a job. The easy way, the sane way. Then I thought about my grandfather, digging in this same spot, sick and dying, driven by a desperate love for a grandson he would never see again. He didn't quit. He built a whole damn bunker. I was just digging a hole for a garden. I picked up my shovel and kept digging. Days turned into weeks. I developed a rhythm. Dig, haul, dump. Dig, haul, dump. I dug until the sun was too high and hot. Then I'd rest in the shade of the barn, studying my books from the library. In the cooler evenings, I'd dig again until it was too dark to see. I lost track of time. My world shrank to the rectangle of earth I was slowly, painstakingly carving out of the desert. I made weekly trips into town for supplies and water. Mr. Henderson at the hardware store started treating me with a grudging respect. He'd offer gruff advice. "You'll need a rock bar for that caliche layer," he'd say. Or, "Better start thinking about how you're going to shore up those walls before a rainstorm collapses the whole thing." He never smiled, but his advice was solid gold. He was, in his own way, helping me. One day, about a month into the digging, I was paying for some supplies when a sleek black sedan I'd never seen before pulled up to the gas station across the street. Two men in expensive-looking suits got out. They didn't look like they belonged in a place like Amboy. They scanned the street, their eyes lingering on the hardware store, on me. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I paid Mr. Henderson, grabbed my things, and walked quickly down the dirt road toward home, not looking back. I told myself it was nothing, businessmen passing through, but I knew better. My grandfather's 20-year lease was up. They were here. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening. Were they out there, watching the barn? The silence of the desert, which had become a comfort, now felt menacing, full of hidden threats. A week later, the letter came. It wasn't delivered by a mailman. There was no mail service out here. It was pinned to the barn door with a pocket knife. The envelope was crisp and expensive. The return address was a law firm in Las Vegas. Inside, the letter was short and to the point. It was from a company called Apex Development Holdings. They said they were aware that I was the new owner of the property. They congratulated me on my inheritance and then made me an offer. They were willing to buy the parcel from me for $15,000. They said it was a generous offer, far above the land's assessed value, and that it was only valid for 30 days. $15,000. Combined with the $10,000 in the box, that was $25,000. It was a fortune. It was my ticket out. It was everything the easy path promised, gift-wrapped and handed to me. But I knew what it really was. It was a test. They weren't a development company. They were the people my grandfather had made the deal with. They wanted the land back. They didn't want any loose ends. They didn't want a witness to whatever they had been doing here for the last 20 years. The $15,000 wasn't an offer. It was a warning. Take the money and disappear. I stood there, holding the letter, the desert wind whipping around me. My half-dug greenhouse was a gaping wound in the earth. The barn groaned, a tired old man sighing. This was the moment of truth, the choice my grandfather had written about. The harder right or the easier wrong. The easy wrong was so tempting. Take the money, leave this place, leave the ghosts and the secrets and the back-breaking labor behind. Be safe, be comfortable. Forget any of this ever happened. The harder right was to stay, to refuse their money, to build my greenhouse on top of their secret, to put down roots in this poisoned soil and make something beautiful grow. It was a terrifying prospect. They were dangerous men. I was just a kid with a shovel. What could I possibly do against people like that? I walked over to the edge of my pit. It was deep now, over 6 feet. The earth walls were cool to the touch. I could smell the moisture in the soil. It smelled like life, like potential. I thought about my grandfather's last words. Don't be like me. Be better. I looked at the letter in my hand, at the clean corporate letterhead and the polite, threatening words. Then I looked at my hands, calloused and stained with the dirt of this place. This dirt was mine. This barn was mine. This future, whatever it held, was mine to build. I tore the letter into tiny pieces
and let the wind scatter them across the desert. The decision to stay changed something in me. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but now it was mixed with something else: defiance. This was my ground, and I wasn't giving it up. I threw myself into the work with a new, frantic energy. I finished the excavation, digging the pit to a depth of 8 feet. I followed the instructions in the books, digging a trench around the perimeter for a drainage pipe and filling it with gravel. I spent a huge chunk of my grandfather's money on lumber, rebar, and bags of concrete mix, which Mr. Henderson delivered in his rattling old pickup truck. He didn't ask any questions, just helped me unload it, his face grim. "That's a hell of a lot of concrete for a garden, kid," was all he said. I taught myself how to build forms for the foundation and the retaining walls. I mixed concrete by hand in a wheelbarrow, a soul-crushing, exhausting process that left my muscles screaming. I poured the foundation. I built the 4-foot-high concrete walls that rose from the floor of the pit. It was slow, agonizing work, and I made 100 mistakes. But with each mistake, I learned. With each bag of concrete I mixed, with each board I cut, I felt myself getting stronger, more capable. The north wall of the greenhouse was the barn's foundation itself. For the other 3 walls, I built insulated frames on top of the concrete, following the designs from my books. The most important part was the roof. It had to be angled precisely at 34 degrees to capture the maximum amount of winter sunlight. It had to be strong enough to withstand the fierce desert winds. I ordered custom-cut panels of heavy-duty polycarbonate, a cheaper and more durable alternative to glass. As I worked, I kept an eye on the dirt road. The black sedan came back twice. It would park a few hundred yards away, just sitting there for an hour or so, 2 dark figures inside, watching me. They were sending a message: "We see you. We're waiting." I did my best to ignore them. I focused on the work. I focused on the sounds of my hammer, my saw, the scrape of my shovel. I was building my fortress, my sanctuary. The barn, which had once seemed like a ruin, now felt like a guardian, protecting me, its shadow falling over my worksite. One day, I found the entrance to their bunker. I was clearing out a pile of old, rotted lumber in the back corner of the barn when my foot went through a section of the floor. I pulled my leg out and peered into the darkness. There was a set of steep concrete steps leading down. The air that rose from the opening was cold and stale, like a tomb. A heavy steel door stood at the bottom. It was sealed with a massive, modern-looking deadbolt, but there was no handle on this side. My grandfather had sealed it from the outside, just as he'd said. I felt a shudder of revulsion. I dragged the heaviest timbers I could find and covered the hole completely, piling junk on top of it. I didn't want to know what was down there. I just wanted it to be gone. The day the polycarbonate panels for the roof arrived was a milestone. It took me a week to build the massive frame and another 3 days to wrestle the panels into place, sealing each one carefully. When the last panel was screwed down, I stood back and looked at my creation. It was strange and beautiful. A gash in the earth, roofed with a translucent skin that shimmered in the sun. From a distance, it barely looked like anything at all. It was subterranean, humble, almost invisible. I built a staircase leading down into the pit, and a door at the top. The first time I walked down those stairs and closed the door behind me, the world changed. The roar of the wind disappeared, replaced by a deep, resonant silence. The air was cool and still, and it smelled of damp earth and curing concrete. The light, filtered through the polycarbonate roof, was soft and diffuse. It felt safe. It felt like a secret place. It felt like a home. Now came the most important part, the soil. I spent the last of the $10,000 on truckloads of rich, organic compost, topsoil, and sand. I hauled it all into the greenhouse, bucket by bucket, and mixed it into the native desert soil, creating deep, fertile growing beds. The day I planted the first seeds, my hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from reverence. I planted tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, herbs, simple things. I had no idea if they would grow. I had followed the books. I had built the structure. But life itself was a mystery I couldn't control. I installed a simple rainwater collection system, channeling water from the barn's rusty gutters into a large cistern I'd placed inside the greenhouse. Every drop of water felt precious. And then I waited. A week passed. Nothing. I went down into the greenhouse 10 times a day, staring at the barren soil, my heart sinking a little more each time. Maybe it was all for nothing. Maybe you couldn't force life to grow in a place of death. Then, on the 8th day, I saw it. A tiny speck of green, no bigger than a pinhead, pushing its way through the dark soil in the lettuce bed. I knelt down, my face inches from the dirt, and stared. It was real. It was alive. I let out a laugh that was half a sob. The next day, there were more. Tiny green shoots, delicate and impossibly brave, reaching for the light. Life was happening. Here, in my secret garden, buried in the earth. The black sedan came back one last time. It was a month after the 30-day deadline on their offer had expired. This time, they didn't just watch from a distance. The car drove right up to the barn and parked, blocking the entrance. The 2 men in suits got out. One was tall and thin, with a face like a hawk. The other was shorter, built like a fire hydrant. I was inside the barn, reinforcing a section of the wall. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. There was nowhere to run. I grabbed the heaviest tool I could find, a long steel crowbar, and held it tight, my knuckles white. The tall man walked to the edge of the barn, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He didn't come inside. He just stood there, looking at me. His eyes were cold and empty. "Leo Vance?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the still air. I just nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. He gestured vaguely at the barn, the land. "You've been busy." It wasn't a compliment. "We made you a fair offer. You didn't respond." "It's not for sale," I managed to say. My voice sounded like a stranger's. The man smiled, a thin, humorless twitch of his lips. "Everything is for sale, kid. It's just a matter of price. We have plans for this area. A kid with a broken-down barn doesn't fit into those plans." "I'm not leaving," I said, lifting the crowbar slightly. It was a pathetic gesture, and we both knew it. He ignored it. He looked past me, his eyes scanning the interior of the barn. He was looking for something, the entrance to the bunker, but he couldn't see it. It was completely hidden. He seemed to come to a decision. "You know, your grandfather was a strange man. Made a deal, did a job, and then just disappeared. We honored our end of the agreement. The space is empty. Our business here is concluded, but we don't like loose ends." He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was pulling out a gun. My whole body tensed. But it was just an envelope. He tossed it onto the ground between us. "A final offer," he said. 20,000. You have 1 week. After that, the offer is withdrawn, and we'll have to pursue other methods of acquisition. Eminent domain,
county code violations. It can get very messy, very unpleasant. Think about it, kid. What's really here for you? He turned and walked back to the car without waiting for an answer. The sedan drove away, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust and fear. I didn't pick up the envelope. I knew what it meant. It wasn't an offer. It was an ultimatum. That night, the doubt came back with a vengeance. I had won a battle, but they had just declared war. They were a corporation. They had lawyers, money, and influence. I was an 18-year-old orphan with a crowbar and a garden. How could I possibly win?
I went down into the greenhouse. The air was warm and humid, a stark contrast to the cold desert night. The little green seedlings were a bit taller now, their leaves unfurled. In the quiet, protected space, surrounded by the evidence of new life, the fear began to recede. What was really here for me? The man had asked. He thought the answer was nothing. A pile of rotting wood and worthless dirt. He couldn't see the truth. My grandfather had given me more than just land. He had given me a challenge, and in meeting it, I had found something I didn't know I was looking for: myself. I had learned how to work, how to build, how to be patient. I had learned how to take something broken and make it whole. I had learned to face my fear and choose the harder path. This place wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of my grandfather's love, my sweat, and the promise of life that was pushing up from the soil. This was my home, and I was going to fight for it. I didn't know how, but for the first time, I believed I could. I had built a greenhouse in the middle of the desert. I had made life grow where nothing was supposed to. I looked at the rows of tiny green plants, and I knew I couldn't abandon them. I couldn't abandon myself. The next morning, I walked to town. I went to the library and used their computer to look up Apex Development Holdings. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. They were a shell corporation with a registered address that was just a P.O. box. But I dug deeper, looking into their past projects, and I found a pattern of lawsuits, accusations of intimidation, and connections to known organized crime figures. Then I started researching property law. I learned about squatters' rights, adverse possession, and how to file a formal complaint against corporate harassment. I was out of my depth, but I was learning. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I needed help. I thought about Ms. Albright, but this was beyond a social worker. I needed a lawyer, a real one, and I had no money to pay for one. I went back to the hardware store. Mr. Henderson was there, sweeping the floor. "Kid," he said, leaning on his broom, "I saw that car at your place yesterday. You in some kind of trouble?" I hesitated, then I told him everything, the whole story. My grandfather, the deal, the bunker, the threats. I expected him to tell me to take the money and run. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Your grandfather, John Vance," he said finally, his voice raspy. "He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself. But he helped me out once, when my roof collapsed after a storm. Didn't ask for a dime, just showed up with his tools and fixed it." He shook his head. "I never knew he was mixed up in something like this." He looked me in the eye. "These Apex people, they've been sniffing around this county for a few years, trying to buy up land cheap for some big resort project nobody wants. They've been bullying folks. Most people just get scared and sell." He spat on the ground. "I hate bullies." He went behind the counter and came back with a crumpled business card. "My nephew, he's a lawyer down in Barstow. Not one of those fancy corporate types. He helps regular people. Tell him his Uncle Frank sent you. Tell him the whole story. He'll listen." It was a thread of hope, a tiny one, but it was enough. I called his nephew that afternoon from the payphone outside the gas station. I told him the story, just as I had told his uncle. He listened, and he believed me. He agreed to take my case pro bono. He said what Apex was doing was illegal, and that with the evidence of their corporate structure and my testimony, we could file for a restraining order and maybe even trigger a state investigation. It was the beginning of a long, complicated fight. There were forms to fill out, statements to give, but I wasn't alone anymore. While the legal battle churned slowly in the background, I focused on my work. The seedlings in the greenhouse grew into strong, vibrant plants. I had to install a ventilation system to keep the temperature from getting too high during the day. I learned about pests and about fertilizing and about the simple, profound joy of watching a tomato ripen from green to red. I started taking my surplus vegetables into town. I set up a small stand outside the hardware store. At first, people were hesitant, but they tried my tomatoes and they tasted the difference. They were fresh, they were real. Soon, I had regular customers. The librarian, the gas station owner, even Mr. Henderson himself. I wasn't making much money, but it was enough to buy supplies and food. I was self-sufficient. I was a part of the community. The restraining order was granted. Apex Development was legally barred from setting foot on my property or contacting me. Their black sedan disappeared. I knew the fight wasn't over, but I had won the first round. I had stood my ground, and I was still standing. One evening, I was sitting on the steps of the barn, watching the sunset. The greenhouse was thriving. The barn, which I had slowly been repairing, board by board, no longer looked like it was about to collapse. It looked sturdy, resilient, a lot like I felt. I had come here with nothing but a key and a ghost's promise. I was a lost kid, an afterthought of the system, with no future and no hope. And now I had a home. I had a purpose. I had a garden that was growing, against all odds, in the middle of the desert. My grandfather had made a deal with darkness to give me a chance at the light. He had built a place of secrets so that I could one day build a place of life. He had taken their blood money, and I had washed it clean with dirt and water and sun. His redemption was my inheritance. His last letter was tucked in my pocket, worn soft from countless readings. Be better. I think, finally, I was starting to understand what he meant. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing to build when it would be easier to break. It was about choosing to grow when it would be easier to wither. It was about choosing hope, even when you're standing in the dark. My story isn't over. The legal fight will continue, and the future is still uncertain. But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm on solid ground. Ground that I cleared, that I dug, that I built upon with my own 2 hands. And maybe your story is just beginning too. Maybe you're standing at your own crossroads, facing your own impossible choice. If you believe in second chances, if you believe in the power of building something from nothing, then I hope you'll join our community. Subscribe to the channel